The Hotel Sterling, once termed as the place to be in downtown Wilkes-Barre, has now transformed to be a place of abandonment on West Market Street. The building, named after businessman and investor Walter G. Sterling, originally consisted of 7 stories, a tall and spacious calm lobby, and demonstrated elegance from the moment you walked through the door. The historical building withstood many natural disasters, including the notorious 1972 Agnes flood, thus symbolizing the character of the city of Wilkes-Barre, tough, beautiful, and prosperous. Now, the Hotel Sterling, abandoned and forgotten in many of our minds, remains a distant memory for the present and future generations in Wilkes-Barre. This is a story of one of the most historical, elegant, and sophisticated buildings in Wilkes-Barre during the 20th century. This is the Hotel Sterling, Rise and Demise. In order to get all aspects of the Hotel Sterling, we seeked answers from local citizens who could share their experiences of the historic building. We gathered information regarding what the Hotel Sterling was like in its heyday, as well as what it has become currently. Tom Mooney, a local professor, writer, and journalist, had a lot to say when recalling his experiences at the Sterling.
Sterling has been a major presence in downtown Wilkes-Barre for many years, more than 100 years, in fact. The original 7-story building was constructed back in the 1890s on the site of the old Wilkes-Barre Music Hall, a very popular theater. It was one of the most popular hotels in town for decades afterward, during the years when Wilkes-Barre was a growing and increasingly prosperous community, and hotels were very much needed. In the late 1920s, the owners of the Sterling decided to build a 12-story addition, which they then did. That required purchasing a smaller hotel between the 2 buildings and incorporating that into the Sterling. At some point, a North River Street building that was known as the Annex was also added to the Sterling property. So it was essentially a compound of 4 separate buildings constructed at different times. Overall, though, the Sterling was the biggest and generally considered to be the most elegant hotel in downtown Wilkes-Barre during those years. The area where the Sterling was located, West Market Street, was a very, very busy thoroughfare. That area was often spoken of until recent decades as the gateway to the city of Wilkes-Barre. That's because it made a very nice skyline, and if you were coming over the Market Street Bridge, it looked as if you were entering a nice, big urban community. The Sterling, of course, was the first and most impressive building you would see. If you walked into the 7-story part of the Sterling back in its good years, I think you would have been impressed by spaciousness, grandness. You had the feeling that you were in a place of importance, and that the Sterling was the place to be if you were holding an event or attending an event there. So just walking in there and seeing where you were, looking around, the Sterling had what I call a wow factor that other downtown venues of that time, that is up until maybe the 1960s, really did not have. If there was one word that comes to mind when you were to enter the main lobby of the Sterling Hotel, it would be big city elegance. The main lobby had a very high ceiling. Everything appeared to be marble. It was a place where guests could meet and congregate, but the general appearance was not the utilitarian appearance of a hotel today. It suggested big city, even European elegance. The Sterling was very much famous for its dining facilities. There was a lunch counter down on the main floor that operated for breakfast and lunch, but the big feature in the Sterling was the huge dining room serving individuals and entire families, and on Sunday it offered a smorgasbord that was popular throughout the area. That was a place to go on Sunday if you wanted really good dining. I worked at the Sterling one summer in 1963. In the mornings I'd work at the lunch counter. Later in the day or in the evening I'd work in the dining room, and you never knew who you were going to see there. All sorts of business people, well-known local people, people you knew. The Sterling, in other words, was a place to be. The Sterling was where you would hold, let's say, a service club meeting. The Sterling was where you would hold a graduation event. The Sterling was where you would hold a convention. All of them catered, of course. Over the years, there were some famous people who stayed at the Sterling. That is, if a well-known person came to Wilkes-Barre, the Sterling would be at least one of the top choices to stay. During the years, in the early decades of the 20th century, and this is something that people have forgotten, Wilkes-Barre was a major entertainment center. The downtown had a lot of theaters, Broadway-style theaters, and we got to see plays before they made it to the big city. And some very, very famous people would appear locally. I often wonder if anything like the old guest books had ever been saved. If they did, they would probably contain some very famous names. Even in the 60s, when I worked there that one summer, I remember one instance in which a very famous band leader at the time, Sammy Kaye, who was here to do a concert, stayed at the Sterling. So naturally, the people down around the kitchen were all excited. The famous Sammy Kaye is staying here. I think he ordered lunch to be sent to his room, and he specifically requested, newspapers and things. And somebody somewhere downstairs made a mistake, and I think did not include the newspapers. And then the person bringing lunch up to Sammy Kaye had to apologize and come downstairs and finish his order. What I remember was that it was a little bit of embarrassment running through the whole staff there, which I was a part of, because they had forgotten to send Sammy Kaye's newspaper up with his lunch. So the Sterling had an ambience that I don't think any other hotel of that time could match. There's another way that I had contact with the Sterling. I was a participant in various events there. Organizations that I belonged to sometimes held meetings or dinners in the various rooms there. And there was again a third way in which I had contact with the Sterling. In the 1960s, King's College began renting the upper floors of the old original part of the Sterling, the 7-story part, for dormitory space. There were still people living on the lower floors, and the 12-story addition was still accepting overnight guests. But the upper 3 floors became part of King's College, and as you might expect, it was a typical college dormitory. A lot of noise, a lot of confusion, a lot of people running around, a lot of visitors. It was, however, a really, really nice place to live if you were attending college. Even though my family lived just a short distance away on East Market Street, within walking distance of King's, I decided to take out a student loan. In fact, I think I was one of the first people in America to take out a student loan so I could live at the Sterling and work with the players at King's. I enjoyed being in the plays. So I lived there for a year on the 7th floor. I got a pretty good view of what the Sterling was. By that time, the Sterling's old glory was beginning to fade, though. The upper floors, it was pretty obvious, had been the cheaper rooms. For example, the rooms didn't all have their own private bathrooms. And I often wondered, in the event of an emergency, would those creaky-looking old fire escapes ever have worked? Would they have been more dangerous than the fire, in other words? Well, I was there for a year, and I understand King's used the Sterling as a dorm for many years afterward. By about the 1970s, though, the Sterling was no longer quite the elegant place it used to be. Eventually, the apartments were rented out to people on a more or less permanent basis as the center of Wilkes-Barre's life shifted away from West Market Street, more toward Public Square and South Main Street. But those of us who lived at the Sterling, I think, still have many, many fond memories of having worked there and having lived there. Sterling employees always impressed me as a very happy, tightly knit crowd. People worked there for many years. They made careers of it, whether they were doing housekeeping or working in the kitchen or doing anything else. The Sterling was, as far as I could tell, considered a fairly good place to work. If you worked there, you made friends that you kept for long afterward. If you lived there as a student, well, it just seemed like a really, really great place to live. In, I think it was the 1990s, right around the turn of the century, the owners of the Sterling, and there were several owners in succession, none of whom really managed to do much of anything with it, unfortunately. Finally, had to clear out the 12-story building, which later on was torn down. Like many other people, I was very saddened to see the Sterling fall into decline, but I guess that was inevitable. Downtown hotels in many cities were running into problems similar to that.
The Sterling's decline led to a serious debate, specifically in the northeastern region of Pennsylvania. Should the Hotel Sterling be renovated and resurrect the grace it once had, or should it be demolished, wiping away a century worth of memories? This led us to Wilkes-Barre City Hall, where we spoke to Mark Berry, the grant coordinator of City Hall, and Kurt Sawyer, the director of Department of Community Developments. They chose not to have their faces shown for identity and legal purposes, but allowed us to record the meeting.
Basically, the developer that was working with the county before the project even became a city project whatsoever, they went out and they did a feasibility study that looked at what would be the possible options for that building, and they came up with really three. The first one would be full restoration of the building, and they did a market analysis as far as what types of building or what type of businesses you might put in there. At one point they were going to say the top 2 floors were going to be apartments, the 3 floors in between were going to be office space, and then the 2 other floors were going to be retail space. And that's what, so they did different studies on, okay, the population here, what the interest would be, would those businesses make it, could you fill the office spaces, could you rent those apartments, and things along those lines. So it was a pretty in-depth type of study. So long story short, once they got done with that and they looked at it, they realized that it would cost anywhere from $26 to $35 million. Now these are ballpark figures to do that. So that was full, complete renovation of the building itself. They gave us a second option, which they called partial demolition, which in essence they were just going to take the first 2 top floors off and leave the existing 4 or 5 there. And similar type of concept, there would probably be some retail businesses in there, might be some office space. I don't know if they were going to put apartments in that particular type of phase. But anyhow, in doing that, they were saying that would probably take or cost anywhere from $13 to roughly approximately $19 million if you're going to be, proceeding that way. Then unfortunately, the last option they looked at was the demolition option. And now at this point in time, when they came up with the study, they were saying it was going to cost anywhere from $900,000 to roughly $1.2 million to demolish the building. But that's really what the developer that was working for Luzerne County had looked at as far as the use of that site. And then I think at that point is then when the direction was made as far as, what was the county, what was the developer, what did they want to try and do with that particular site. And then it kind of falls into, unfortunately, they realized, okay, they looked at the different resources and funding that was out there, and they realized, well, we're not going to be able to come up with the $35 million it's going to take to renovate the whole thing. And in fact, they couldn't even come up with it, the partial restoration of the building. So at this point in time, they looked at it and said, well, our only option is going to be option 3, which was going to be demolition. And then that's when they put the package together where they had said, okay, we're going to try and have Luzerne County, work here with the city. And we had talked earlier about the city had applied to get some gaming funds that were going to be used for the restoration of the building. And then unfortunately, when the decision was made, really, from the developer saying, okay, well, we're not going to be able to restore this building. We're going to need to go with the option, unfortunately, of demolishing it. Those funds then were basically revised over to actually be used for demolition.
Demolition of the Sterling became the obvious and more appropriate choice. However, demolition is as easy as swinging a wrecking ball around and knocking over buildings. It takes a specific process in order to be completely successful. The process for the demolition of the Sterling, however, was and still to this day is continuously prolonged due to restriction and funding issues.
And one agency responded that we have an endangered species living on the Market Street Bridge, which opened up a whole new can of worms. We had to get approval from the Pennsylvania Game Commission prior to any work being done on that building. We have certain restrictions on the demolition. We can't blow the building up.
Yeah.
right? We cannot. We have to start in certain areas to tear it down, not to disturb their nesting season. There's so many issues. We have to get approval from HUD. We have to get approval from the state. I mean, there's issues that can happen at a moment's notice. Like I said, I am sending letters out to these agencies today. These agencies today, telling them about the release of funds. I don't know what kind of surprises they're going to give me.
Like this, you got to figure out, okay, where am I going to get this funding? And a lot of times for CURTS funding, which is federal funding, there's lots of regulations and rules and hoops and things that you have to jump through till you get it to the point where finally the federal government will say, okay, fine, we'll release these funds to you. But during that time frame, it's going to take time. It's going to take some months, and you know, sometimes it could take years, unfortunately. So, I mean, that really is, a lot of people just say, oh, geez, why don't they just tear that building down? Well, easy to say that, but as far as to actually get the money to do that, it's quite a process to get to that point where you physically have access to the funds and you can say, all right, we can proceed with bidding the job and eventually bringing the building down.
Once demolition was the final answer in the fate of the Sterling, the citizens of Wilkes-Barre were not happy, to say the least. Protests began in front of the historic building titled Save the Sterling. We were able to contact one member who in March of 2011 participated in the Save the Sterling protest.
Well, we're all here in the hopes of saving the Sterling. We're here to see an old beauty that has sit far too long here in this particular area. It needs care, it needs to come back. There's a lot of memories attached to the Sterling. A group of us have been talking, and it certainly can come back as a hotel. Why not? It was a hotel once. It'd be perfect. The city is growing. The surrounding area is growing. The hotel is perfect with restaurants and ballrooms, just as it used to be. It's been done in other cities throughout the country. Can we bring this back? Sure, we can bring this back.
Her name is Sally Healy, a former code enforcer for Wilkes-Barre. She spoke to us about her past experiences about the Sterling as well as her protest activities.
I wanted to focus on the city, to focus on the city and what is going to become of the Sterling, what's happening here. As I mentioned before, it's still standing. It's going to stand until the city takes it down, or City Vest, or the county. But it was always just a beauty. When we'd be on the picket line, for example, on a Saturday, Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, people would drive by and just stop and say, what's the story here? What's happening? People from out of town were astounded. As I mentioned, that this building was let to be the way it is since 1998. A lot of people asked if they could go in to see the building, but I said no, of course. And I know people have been in it off and on. I think we all know people have gone in it, but they were just stupefied that that building wasn't cared for more than it was. When I was a kid, when anybody was a kid around here up until 1998, one went into the Sterling on a regular basis. There was a gorgeous dining room, beautiful views. It was a Class A place. You could tell by what's left of the building that it had a lot of class. Anyone could see just the way the building looks. It was a favorite place for people to go, many people. It's my understanding that President Kennedy stopped here at one point. There were some movie stars in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s coming by, that this would be the place people would stay. I live in the east end of Wilkes-Barre. Of course, I never had a chance to get a room at the Sterling, but I probably would have loved to. But there were so many times families would go in there and just have one good time, just touring, going through the Sterling. It will be remembered for what it once was. There are still people here that remember way, way back, and some of my students have been taken in by their parents, taken into the Sterling for whatever reasons. Remember, it just went down or stopped being a hotel until about 1998. Before that, there were bands that played in the Sterling. There were still some restaurants in there.
Besides the glamorous events and the overall beauty of the exterior, our interview, we spoke about the luxurious interior of the hotel.
The Sterling had all sorts of possessions in there. For example, there were really nice paintings lining the hallways, something you would never see in a hotel today. I have no idea what happened to all those accoutrements, but collectively they were among the things that made you feel like you were in a special place. When you would look up and you would see the elegant lighting, when you would walk down a hallway and see the beautiful paintings on both sides, you felt as if you were in a really, really nice place.
It's a historic building. We have to save a lot of stuff in that building that has to be transferred. Some of the artifacts, some of the columns, some of the architecture inside the building have to be saved by the contractors demolish it, turned over to the Luzerne County Historical Society for their display, and I think it's going to be at the Sweatland Homestead.
Little by little by little, things became missing, and that's the big thing. It's kind of a sad feeling. It's just people coming in, taking things, putting things on eBay, selling things. How they get in, there's many ways to get into Sterling if you want to. It's just the idea of pillaging something, and something that was once an old beauty.
Yes, some of the building's artifacts have been lost throughout time, but we were able to find one piece of history from the hotel. Dave Coral, an avid and enthusiastic art collector, restored a chandelier that was once placed in the lobby of the Hotel Sterling, thus trying to revive the elegance the chandelier previously had.
I was at an auction in Dallas, Pennsylvania, and there was a chandelier hanging from a rack that was twisted, bent, like a Twisted Sister kind of thing. It was off kilter. It was missing half of the crystals. It was in terrible shape, and the auctioneer mentioned that it was the third time that he had sold it in his auctioning career, that people buy it, but they don't know what to do with it. And it had been laying in a barn somewhere out in the country, and up it went. The auctioning, the bidding started, and I bought it for $1,200. And then I kind of had buyer's remorse, but I got over it quickly. And there was a whole story about it coming from the Sterling, and I thought it would be interesting. So I had it delivered, and we hung it to fix it after we had a good day. I guess I looked at it for a month or so, and I brought one of the guys that works with me, a young man named Isaro Castro, who is very talented, and he took it apart, shined every piece, rewired the whole thing.
It was fun. It was fun putting together everything, because when Debbie bring it in, it was with shorts on the cables, and a lot of crystal loss, and he spent I think a lot of money to get the things from I don't know from where, but he get all the parts lost, and I'm in charge to put all together. It took me a long time, like 3 months.
I thought it would be a good centerpiece for the restaurant, which was in my brain, that I was going to build. And I thought that with the ceilings that I have around here, that I would be able to put it up somewhere.
The restaurant that possesses this sophisticated piece of art is none other than the Canteen 900, located in 44, Pennsylvania. Abby Singh, a manager at the restaurant, claims the restored chandelier brings local credibility to their establishment.
This just brings local history, local culture. This is, a lot of our local identity. A lot of people in the area, went to the Hotel Sterling. That's where they celebrated their special moments. So now when people come into Canteen 900 to celebrate parties and birthdays and, all sorts of other things, we're just kind of living life under the chandelier, all the special moments of life. Even the ordinary days are still, a lot of people don't know it's from the Hotel Sterling. Once they find out that it is from the Hotel Sterling, they're absolutely in awe. They just keep looking at it, staring at it. They always tell me stories about how they got married and it was under the chandelier, or how they celebrated parties, and they always tell me their experience at the Sterling under the chandelier. So it's nice to hear. I'm happy to hear all the stories. Picture was on the front page of the Times Leader, so that was, a nice publicity for the restaurant and for the, the chandelier in general.
But I understand that a lot of people just come in and just look and stories, and And there's a lot of emotion, and I don't know that I have that. You know, a lot of people come in that used to work there. She uses it for parties. She drops it down. It's on a cable system. It goes down. She keeps it clean. She changes the bulbs. She puts a lot of love into it, and they get a lot of PR out of it. It's kind of cool.
There's so much about the chandelier. It's huge. It's, you know, really magnificent. It's awesome. It lights up like you wouldn't believe at night. Any way you look at it, it's pretty awe-inspiring. You just imagine how much history was lived under it, too.
Although the Hotel Sterling is in its twilight years, there is no doubt it has left a lasting impression on downtown Wilkes-Barre. Friendships were created, families gathered, entertainers visited, and more importantly, people enjoyed the ambience of the luxurious hotel. Even though plans to demolish the historic building are ongoing, no wrecking ball can diminish the meetings, conventions, and banquets held in their upscale, sophisticated public rooms. The elegance of the Hotel Sterling is restored in local restaurants, historical societies, and city buildings, proving that even though the Hotel Sterling will not physically be there, the legacy will live forever.
If the Sterling Hotel has a legacy, the legacy, as I said, would live on in the memories of the people who stayed there, worked there, or attended events there. And again, the key word there is elegance. The Sterling had a cachet that no other downtown venue from, let's say, the 1920s up through the 1960s could match. I think local people, and I'm a typical local person, would feel better if we could see the Sterling finally put to rest so that it will remain in our memories as the glorious structure it used to be, and we will no longer see it in its decline.
Well, anytime you tear down a building that's historically significant has an effect on the city. Saving the artifacts, creating the history of the building is a very important part of it. I mean, at this point, the building is deteriorated, but we're trying to save the legacy of the building as much as possible. Don't you agree, Mark?
Sure.
I mean, any portion, any building that is construction on that site, part of the Hotel Sterling legacy has to be part of it, and it has to be permanently displayed in that building. So it's not disappearing. The building may disappear, but the legacy of the building will not disappear.
Well, part of its heritage, part of its culture, part of the beauty of some of these buildings. 1894 is a long time gone. I'd be sad to see it go, and so would a lot of other people, but others have a different say on the matter, and we'll see. I don't think the story's over. And from the people that I've polled or been with, even much younger people don't quite get the whole idea. And they won't. It's going to be gone. What's the memory? It's gone.